Sometimes, justice wears a face we don't expect, and the uniform that's supposed to protect can conceal unexpected prejudices. When Special Agent Brandon Jacobs pulled up to a small-town police station in rural Claiborne, he had no idea his credentials would be mocked by the very officer sworn to uphold the law. But that morning, under the harsh buzz of flickering fluorescent lights, a dismissive laugh cut through the air, setting off a chain of events no one saw coming. Little did the scoffing cop know, fate had a lesson in store, one that would shake the entire department and demand an extraordinary brand of justice. The cop laughed at the black FBI agent's ID until the chief walked in behind him. Brandon Jacobs wasn't a rookie. He had clawed his way up the ranks at the FBI through sheer determination, graduating from the FBI Academy in Quantico with honors. Born and raised in Southside Chicago, he'd grown familiar with the sound of sirens and the tension that gripped his neighborhood. That environment fueled his passion for law enforcement and compelled him to pursue a path where he could protect the vulnerable. He believed in justice, not the kind that flexed its muscles and demanded blind respect, but the kind that listened and understood before passing judgment. He arrived in Claiborne County on a brisk Monday morning. Fall leaves dotted the roads like scattered remnants of summer's end. His mission, to conduct a follow-up investigation regarding a series of narcotics busts that had ties all the way back to a major distribution network in Detroit. Word had reached the FBI that a small corner of Claiborne had been infiltrated by a ring of suppliers who used the sleepy town as a waypoint. The local police had requested federal backup, though many in the department probably never thought an FBI agent would actually show up. This was the kind of place where folks believed they could handle their own problems, or so the rumor went. Brandon found himself recalling every moment of training as he navigated the winding roads leading up to the Claiborne Police Department. Nestled between rolling hills and farmland, the station was a squat brick building with thick windows and an American flag out front. A wave of nostalgia passed over him. Smaller stations like these reminded him of the volunteer-run offices he occasionally visited with his father, who was once a community leader, small but proud. Usually, such departments boasted a tight-knit group of officers who didn't take kindly to outside interference, especially from the feds. At the front desk, a bored-looking clerk took one glance at Brandon's dark suit and stoic face and gave a dismissive grunt. The man typed something into his computer, presumably verifying Brandon's identity, before waving him down a hallway. No smiles, no pleasantries, just a gesture that said, "Go on, you're not my problem." Brandon strode confidently, scanning the building's layout. Bulletin boards were cluttered with memos, missing person flyers, and community announcements. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, painting the halls in sterile shades of white. He passed by the break room, where the smell of burnt coffee wafted out. Two officers paused their conversation to eye him warily. Brandon simply nodded and kept walking. He was looking for the lead detective on the narcotics case. They had agreed to meet that morning, Detective Riley Price, a veteran known for being thorough and methodical. As he pushed through a set of heavy double doors, Brandon inadvertently stepped into a space clearly dominated by uniformed officers. Their chatter halted. He could almost feel the questions scorching the back of his neck. Who is this guy? He located Detective Price's desk after a few more turns. Price greeted him with a careful handshake. She was tall, with a neat blonde bun and a face that carried the lines of too many nights spent poring over case files. Her handshake was firm and genuine. Brandon felt the tension in his chest relax a little. At least someone here was friendly. They chatted about the case briefly, with Price explaining how she'd uncovered a paper trail linking local suspects to a major drug syndicate across state lines. But that initial breath of relief turned sour the moment an officer in uniform strolled over. He had a prominent jaw, a buzz cut, and a smirk that settled easily on his lips. Officer Greg Larson, badge pinned to his chest, stared at Brandon with a flash of disdain. "Who's this?" Larson asked, nodding at Brandon, as if he wasn't standing right there. "FBI Special Agent Brandon Jacobs," Price replied curtly, her tone making it clear. She wasn't in the mood for nonsense. Brandon extended his identification to confirm, used to departmental formalities. But Officer Larson just snorted and eyed the credentials. "Right, so he says," he murmured, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Brandon maintained a carefully neutral expression. He'd been coached on how to handle hostility, especially from local law enforcement, who might view the FBI as an overstepping agency. Still, it stung. "Look, pal," Larson continued, leaning in with a grin that did nothing to hide its malice. "Anyone can print out a fancy ID. You got to be more convincing than that, if you want me to believe you're FBI." Before Brandon could respond, Price whirled on Larson. "That's enough," she snapped, visibly annoyed. "We're cooperating with the Bureau. Jacobs is here on official business." Larson didn't look impressed. He folded his arms across his chest and pursed his lips. "Sure, official business." Then, with a dismissive laugh, he turned away, leaving the tension crackling in the room like live electricity. Brandon let out a low exhale. He'd encountered skepticism before, especially from older or more territorial officers. But rarely had he encountered such flagrant disregard from someone he'd never even met. Price shot him an apologetic glance. "Don't pay Larson any mind," she said, voice low and urgent. "He's complicated. Got a bit of a chip on his shoulder about the FBI and, well..." She hesitated, and her eyes flicked away for a moment. Brandon knew exactly what she was going to say, or skirt around saying. He waved a hand dismissively. "I've dealt with worse," he assured her, putting on a reassuring smile. He didn't really feel. And so began his day in Claiborne County, an unceremonious welcome that would prove to be the tip of a very large iceberg of issues he was about to uncover. If Officer Larson's sneer was an immediate storm cloud, the actual day felt strangely calm afterward. Brandon and Detective Price spent the rest of the morning in a cramped office, reviewing files. The occasional phone rang in the background, and a couple of officers poked their heads in with questions. But it was mostly quiet. From the reports Price had compiled, it seemed Claiborne was not just a scenic rural town. It was also a corridor for drug traffic. Someone had used a local trucking company's routes to funnel narcotics through state lines. The trucks were large, unassuming, and their cargo manifests were riddled with inaccuracies that had somehow slipped past the local enforcement's oversight. When Brandon asked Price how local authorities had missed these glaring red flags, she seemed uncomfortable. "We have a limited number of officers," she explained, "and half of them are more used to dealing with DUIs and neighborly disputes, not intricate drug operations. By the time we realized we were in over our heads, these criminals were well established." Brandon sensed there was more beneath the surface. "What about the leadership here?" "The chief?" he asked. Price's face softened. "Chief Henderson is a good man," she said. "Fair, old school in some ways. But he's spent years building trust with the community, so he's always trying to keep panic at bay. And that sometimes means downplaying the severity of certain issues to the public. But when I showed him the trail, he put in a request for FBI support. The hours wore on, and by late afternoon, Brandon had compiled a list of leads. It was time to hit the ground running. Price offered to drive him around town, show him the trucking company warehouses and some of the shady spots rumored to be distribution points. They walked out together, only to see Officer Larson leaning against a squad car, chatting with another officer. The moment Brandon came into view, the smirk returned. "Oh, hey, here comes the Fed," he quipped, giving a theatrical little bow. "Careful, you don't want to get lost in our humble town." Price stiffened. Brandon, refusing to let Larson get under his skin, simply walked by as though the officer had said nothing at all. But he could feel the weight of Larson's stare burning holes in his back, and he wondered how deep the officer's hostility ran and, more importantly, why. As they pulled away from the station, Price sighed. "Sorry you had to deal with that. We rarely get outside agents here, and some of the guys can be unwelcoming. They view federal involvement as an insult to their own capabilities." Brandon gave a nod. "I understand the territorial thing, but that's not all it is it?" Price hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Larson, well, he's had some complaints filed against him for roughing up suspects, especially suspects of color. Nothing's ever stuck, though. The folks who filed complaints usually leave town, or the internal review finds no conclusive evidence. Maybe it's just a rumor mill, but you know how these things go. He did all too well." And it made him wonder, if Larson was that brazen in front of him, a federal agent, what did he act like behind closed doors to the people who didn't have government IDs in their pockets? They drove through Claiborne, past well-tended lawns, an old movie theater with a fading marquee, and a small diner named Mama Pearl's. The name rang with local charm, and Price confessed it was her favorite place to grab a quick bite. Best apple pie in the county, apparently. Brandon made a mental note to stop by, hoping a bit of local flavor would help him understand the rhythms of this town. Price guided him to a wide lot near the edge of town, where rows of semi-trailers sat behind a chain-link fence. This was the main warehouse for Henderson and Sons Trucking. Brandon found it ironic that the company name shared the police chief's surname, though Price explained it was pure coincidence, different Henderson families. Inside, they met the warehouse manager, a balding man with anxious eyes named Sam Fields. He was cooperative, but visibly nervous, handing over shipping manifests with shaky hands. "We move a lot of goods through here," Fields said, "mostly agricultural products, grain, livestock feed, some specialty produce. I wouldn't know if someone was slipping something illegal inside." He sounded genuinely distressed. "I only run the front office, you see." Brandon flipped through the papers. The shipments were indeed mostly agricultural, but the volumes and destinations occasionally spiked without warning. It was the perfect setup for smuggling large quantities of narcotics, lots of cargo going in and out, and a manager who had no reason to be suspicious of the contents. While Price took notes, Brandon asked Sam about background checks on drivers. Sam shrugged. "We hire part-timers all the time. It's a revolving door. Might be a question for corporate." Outside, with the sky a pale autumn orange, Price rubbed her temples. "I'll cross-check these driver names with local addresses. We might find a pattern. We know the shipments are traveling through multiple states, so there should be a federal paper trail too." Brandon gave a curt nod. "Exactly. Let's see who's behind it. If we can find a driver or manager with a record, that could be our lead, but it might be more complex. They could be using stand-ins, forging IDs. Happens often." As they walked back to the car, a chill wind kicked up, scattering leaves across the pavement. Brandon had a creeping feeling that something about this operation was bigger than it seemed. Claiborne might just be a small puzzle piece in a national scheme, but each piece was crucial to the broader picture, and it was his job to figure out exactly how it fit. The next morning, Brandon arrived at the station early. He found a quiet corner in the nearly deserted squad room and started reviewing the manifests again. Although the front desk clerk ignored him, he didn't mind. He preferred solitude for dissecting data. The overhead lights buzzed, and an ancient fan in the corner rattled. In these small moments, his mind drifted back to his training days at Quantico, to the unwavering seriousness of instructors who told him, repeatedly, "You have to work twice as hard to command half as much respect." Those words had proven true time and time again. He was so absorbed that he didn't notice Officer Larson approach until he heard the sneering voice. "So, still playing FBI, huh?" Brandon looked up to see Larson leaning against a desk, arms crossed, that same condescending grin plastered on his face. Brandon stayed calm, placing his pen down on the desk. "Is there something you need, Officer Larson?" Larson feigned thoughtfulness. Let me think. Yeah, maybe an explanation as to why you're snooping around our town. Why's the FBI sending you?" The emphasis on that last word was clear. A dog whistle disguised as playful insolence. Brandon's jaw tightened. He could deflect, or he could address this head-on. "The department requested assistance with a narcotics case. I'm the agent assigned. I'm just here to help, nothing more." "That's interesting," Larson said. "And you know, we handle plenty of criminals without Fed intervention, but then you show up." He trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air. Just then, the door behind them opened. In walked a tall man in a crisp uniform, Chief Walter Henderson. His presence demanded attention without him uttering a single word. Larson straightened, losing that arrogant slouch. Chief Henderson moved with a measured grace, as though he'd spent decades perfecting an aura of authority. Lines of age creased his face, but his posture was proud and his gaze sharp. He locked eyes with Brandon and offered a broad handshake. "Agent Jacobs, I presume." "It's good to finally meet you," Chief, Brandon said, accepting the handshake. "Thanks for having me here." Without missing a beat, Henderson swiveled toward Larson and took in the tension. "Is there a problem, Officer Larson?" Larson's bravado evaporated like morning dew. "No problem, sir," he answered stiffly, eyes darting. Henderson gave a slow nod. "That's what I thought." Then he turned back to Brandon. "Detective Price mentioned you're deep into the trucking records. I appreciate your diligence. I want to ensure you have full cooperation from my people. If you hit any roadblocks, you come talk to me." He said it loud enough for Larson to hear, effectively killing any argument before it could start. For a moment, Brandon almost felt sorry for the officer. Almost. But the memory of Larson's sneer quickly extinguished any pity. "Thank you, Chief," Brandon replied. "I will." And then, in a moment of vindication that felt almost surreal, Chief Henderson added, "Larson, I expect you to assist Agent Jacobs if he needs anything." "Understood?" "Yes, sir," Larson said, his face reddening. He shot Brandon a hard look, but maintained rigid compliance. The chief gave a final curt nod and walked away, leaving Larson standing there, chastised. Brandon didn't say a word, but inside he felt a flicker of satisfaction. It wasn't about petty revenge. It was about recognition that, for once, a person in authority had stood up for him openly, leaving no room for doubt. Larson stomped off with an air of injured pride. The entire exchange seemed to echo in the station's hushed corridors, a silent reminder that prejudice wouldn't be tolerated, at least not in front of the chief. Brandon wondered, though, if the quiet hallways would carry that echo forward, or if it would vanish the moment Henderson left. That evening, Brandon returned to the modest motel the FBI had arranged for him. With a single flickering lamp and peeling wallpaper, it wasn't the most luxurious place, but it was clean enough. He laid out his notes on a small table, scanning everything for patterns. No direct link between the local officers and the narcotics ring had surfaced yet. But there was something about Officer Larson. He couldn't quite ignore. His hostility seemed personal, even beyond the usual friction between feds and local cops. Deciding he needed a clearer head, Brandon changed into casual clothes and drove into town for dinner at Mama Pearl's diner, which Price had so highly recommended. The moment he walked in, The scent of fried chicken and homemade gravy embraced him like a warm welcome. The place had red vinyl booths, checkerboard floors, and a row of pies behind a glass case at the counter. He took a seat at the counter, scanning the menu. A waitress named June, her hair pinned back in a lopsided bun, approached with a smile. "New in town?" she asked, handing him a laminated menu. "Just passing through on business," Brandon said. June nodded. "Well, you can't pass through Claiborne without trying our home fries, or the sweet tea. People drive from counties over just for it." Brandon gave a polite smile. "I'll keep that in mind." As he waited for his meal, he overheard snippets of conversation from the booths behind him, locals discussing the upcoming county fair, the high school football team's chances in the playoffs, and a rumored shooting in a neighboring town. It sounded normal enough, but after about 10 minutes, a hush fell over the diner. Brandon felt eyes on him and turned to see who had entered. Officer Larson. Of course. He stepped inside, looked around, and spotted Brandon immediately. For a split second, Larson's gaze flickered with something akin to surprise, but it quickly hardened. Brandon shifted his posture to show he wasn't the least bit intimidated. If Larson wanted to rattle him off duty, it wasn't going to happen. To Brandon's astonishment, Larson took a seat 2 stools away. The tension crackled like a live wire. June approached him hesitantly, and Larson ordered coffee with a dismissive wave of his hand. Brandon's phone buzzed. A text from Price. "Got some new lead on drivers. Meeting tomorrow, 7 am." He typed a quick reply, then turned his attention back to the awkward situation beside him. Larson stared straight ahead, but the reflection in the diner's metal napkin holder gave him away. He was stealing glances at Brandon. Finally, the officer cleared his throat. "Seems you're making yourself at home," he said, voice low. Brandon didn't look up from his phone. "Just grabbing a bite. Quiet place," he replied evenly. Larson scoffed. "You can pretend all you want, but I see right through you. Folks around here don't trust outsiders, especially ones who act like they're above us." Brandon set his phone down. "I don't act like I'm above anyone. I'm here to do my job. Something your chief specifically requested." Larson scowled, his voice barely above a whisper. "Let me give you some advice. Once you wrap up this so-called investigation, go back to wherever you came from. You might think you have friends here, but you don't." There was an undeniable racial undertone to his words, and it made Brandon's blood run cold. He kept his composure, though his heart hammered in his chest. "I'm only here to stop criminals," he replied. "That shouldn't threaten an honest cop." Larson's eyes narrowed. "Watch it," he warned. Before the tension could escalate further, June arrived with Brandon's meal meatloaf, mashed potatoes, and a heaping side of green beans. She cast a worried glance at both men, but said nothing. Brandon thanked her, focusing on the comfort of warm food. Larson drank his coffee in silence, then stood to leave. As he paid at the counter, he paused, looking back at Brandon. "Claiborne isn't big, but it has its ways. You do well to remember that." With that, he strode out, letting the door bang shut behind him. The din of conversation slowly resumed, but Brandon's appetite had diminished. He forced down a few bites, determined not to let Larson rattle him. He told himself he'd faced worse. Yet something about the venom in Larson's eyes told him that the real trouble was still to come, and it might be the type of trouble that had nothing to do with narcotics and everything to do with old prejudices that ran through certain veins of the community. The following morning, Brandon met Detective Price bright and early. She had a thick folder in hand and dark circles under her eyes, suggesting she'd slept even less than he had. They found a quiet conference room to spread out the evidence. Newspaper clippings, photos of suspicious cargo shipments, driver rosters, and scribbled notes fanned out across the table. "Late last night, I found something interesting," Price said, tapping a paper. "An employee named Carlos Diaz. He was arrested in Detroit 3 years ago on drug-related charges. Charges were dropped when the arresting officer fell under investigation for misconduct. So we don't know much. But now Diaz works here, driving for Henderson and Sons Trucking, and that's suspicious as hell. Brandon's eyes lit up. So we have a known figure with alleged ties to drugs, driving the exact trucks that might be used for smuggling. This is definitely a lead. Let's talk to him. Price nodded. He lives in a trailer park on the outskirts of town. Might be best if we visit him there, see if he's willing to talk. If not, we can bring him in for questioning. They left in Price's squad car, heading through winding roads until they reached a patch of dilapidated trailers surrounded by unkempt lawns. A few curious faces peered out from windows as they parked. Price checked the address, and they approached a faded green trailer, the steps creaking under their weight. A young woman answered, weary lines etched across her face. "Yes, we're looking for Carlos Diaz," Price said, flashing her badge. The woman pointed inside. "He's sleeping," she said, her voice tinged with fear. "Is he in trouble?" Brandon gave a gentle smile. "We just want to ask him a few questions." When Carlos finally stumbled to the door, he looked groggy and apprehensive. He recognized Price's badge instantly and Brandon's FBI ID as well, though he didn't laugh it off. There was no mockery here, only dread. "Look, I don't want no trouble," Carlos said, stepping outside to speak privately. He wore a threadbare T-shirt and jeans, his eyes avoiding direct contact. "We're investigating the trucking routes," Price explained. "We know you work for Henderson and Sons." Carlos inhaled shakily. "Yeah, I drive for them, mostly short hauls, deliver feed to local farms." "That's it," Brandon cut in. "Have you noticed anything strange? Extra cargo you're not supposed to have? People telling you to take detours?" Carlos hesitated. "Sometimes the manifest doesn't match the load, but that ain't my job to question. I'm just a driver. I get paid per mile. You're aware of the recent arrests in town related to narcotics?" Brandon pressed. "Someone's shipping large quantities of drugs through these trucks. If you have any information, now's the time to speak up." Carlos rubbed his face, eyes darting around as though expecting an ambush. "I don't know nothing about that man, I swear." Price looked at Brandon, clearly unconvinced. But before they could push further, a commotion erupted behind them. A patrol car pulled up, sirens briefly wailing, and out stepped Officer Larson, looking irritated and impatient. "What the hell is this?" Larson demanded, approaching them. "Detective, you're outside your jurisdiction." "We usually handle stuff like this differently." Price bristled. "I'm following a lead in the narcotics case. This is official business, Larson." He turned his glare on Brandon. "And I suppose you dragged the FBI into a simple interview? Overkill, if you ask me." Brandon stayed calm. "We're working together on a federal case, officer. Let's not obstruct an active investigation." Larson stepped closer, invading Brandon's space. "I don't recall the chief authorizing you to come down here. You got a warrant? Or do you think you can just push folks around with your shiny badge?" Brandon met his gaze evenly. "We're not pushing anyone around. We're asking questions. That's standard police work, in case you've forgotten." Carlos took a nervous step back, glancing between the officers. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Finally, Price intervened. "Larson, we're done here. Unless you'd like to bring Diaz in for formal questioning. But that might tip off the real criminals if we show our hand too soon." Larson scowled, but he didn't argue. He merely turned and stomped back to his patrol car, slamming the door so hard the frame rattled. After he sped off, Price turned to Carlos, issuing a final warning. "We'll be in touch," she said, handing him her card. As they drove away, Brandon clenched his jaw. "That man has a serious problem with me, with us." Price nodded. "He's always been a thorn, but this is escalating. I don't like it. Be careful, Agent Jacobs. Claiborne might be small, but if Larson wants to make your life difficult, he'll find a way." Later that day, Brandon decided to pay an unannounced visit to the trucking company's corporate office, located a few miles outside of town in a nondescript building. Detective Price was tied up in department paperwork, so he went alone. The receptionist, a jittery woman in her 50s, asked him to wait. After a few minutes, a man in a crisp suit emerged, a regional manager named Russell Blake. He had the polished smile of someone accustomed to corporate negotiations. "Special Agent Jacobs, is it?" Blake asked, extending a hand. "I was told you're investigating one of our drivers." "I'm investigating a broader smuggling operation," Brandon replied, "and your roots may be involved. We'd like your cooperation, employee histories, shipping logs, anything that might shed light on suspicious activity." Blake's smile turned wary. "Of course, we're happy to comply. Though I must say, we run a tight ship here. If anyone was using our trucks for illegal activity, they did it without our knowledge." Brandon studied the man's expression. Corporate types were good at plausible deniability. "I understand. But you might want to check your background checks more thoroughly. We found one driver with a prior drug arrest in Detroit." Blake's eyes widened in feigned surprise. "Really? That's concerning. We'll review our HR processes immediately. If you send me the relevant documents, we'll act." They shook hands, and Brandon could sense the superficiality beneath the polite veneer. Blake was either genuinely clueless or a master at hiding whatever was going on. Still, the more people he informed about the investigation, the more likely the criminals behind the operation would panic. And panicking criminals often made mistakes. As the days passed, Brandon and Price worked tirelessly. They uncovered more irregularities in the shipping, manifests, certain routes repeated at odd hours, certain trucks left unassigned but still recorded as in transit. The deeper they dug, the more it seemed like an inside job. Someone within Henderson and Sons had to be orchestrating the movement of narcotics, ensuring the logs looked legitimate enough to avoid scrutiny. Late one night, Price and Brandon sat in the station's conference room, takeout containers scattered across the table. Price slumped in her chair. "We need a break. Something or someone who can tie these threads together. If we only had a driver who'd flip on the operation." Brandon glanced at his phone, half expecting a tip or a surprise text. "I think Carlos Diaz might be our best shot. He's vulnerable, obviously scared. If we can get him into protective custody." The door flew open, and in stormed Officer Larson, Detective Agent Jacobs. "The chief wants to see you, both of you, right now." Price and Brandon exchanged concerned looks before hurrying to the chief's office. Chief Henderson stood behind his desk, an imposing figure, even at his advanced age. He held a printout in one hand, brow furrowed in anger. "Agent Jacobs, Detective Price," he said in a clipped tone, "we have a problem." He placed the paper on the desk. It was a formal complaint from a local business owner who claimed Brandon had harassed staff at Henderson and Sons. Brandon blinked in confusion. "Harassed? All I did was ask for records relevant to our investigation." Larson stood off to the side, arms crossed, looking smug. Henderson continued, "They're claiming you exceeded your authority, made veiled threats, intimidated employees." "I don't appreciate these allegations against my department or my cooperating federal agents," Price scoffed. "That's ridiculous, Chief. Jacobs did nothing of the sort." Brandon felt a surge of anger. "They're trying to undermine the investigation. I have the right to request relevant documents." The chief held up a hand. "Calm down. I don't believe these allegations for a second, but it means the situation is getting complicated. Corporate is calling the mayor, and the mayor is calling me. They're rattled." He looked at Brandon gravely. "Which might mean you're onto something." Larson grunted, skepticism dripping from his posture. "Or maybe the FBI's stepping on toes it shouldn't." Henderson ignored Larson and addressed Brandon directly, his voice firm. "Keep doing your job, but do it by the book. I've got your back, Agent Jacobs, but I need to make sure everything is airtight. No slip-ups." Brandon nodded, relieved to have the chief's support. "Understood, sir." As they left the office, Larson shot Brandon a sideways look. "You're being watched," he whispered. "And Claiborne isn't as quiet as you think." Brandon locked eyes with him. "Is that a warning or a threat?" Larson smirked. "Take it however you want." A day later, everything turned upside down. It started with a frantic call from Carlos Diaz. Early that morning, he phoned the station, asking for Detective Price or the FBI agent. His voice trembled, words barely coherent. Price called Brandon, and they rushed to the trailer park. They found Carlos pacing outside his trailer, eyes wild. "They came for me," he gasped the moment. Brandon stepped out of the car. Two men, big guys, wearing hoodies. "They threatened me, said if I talk to the cops again, I'm done for. They even roughed up my girlfriend. She's at the hospital now." Price's face hardened. "We need to get you somewhere safe, right now." Carlos swallowed hard. "I'll talk. I'll tell you whatever you need to know. Just protect me." Brandon's phone buzzed right then, a text from an unknown number. "Drop the case or else." His stomach tightened. Whoever was behind this was getting desperate. They quickly arranged for Carlos to be taken to a safe location under police guard. Brandon and Price were about to head out when they heard commotion in the distance. A squad car's siren wailed, and an ambulance tore down the street toward the trailer park's entrance. They hopped into Price's car and followed the vehicles, only to find a ghastly scene. Officer Larson lying on the pavement near his patrol car, blood seeping through his uniform. Another officer frantically applied pressure to a wound on Larson's abdomen, radioing for backup. Brandon's heart lurched. Whatever personal vendetta Larson had against him, no one deserved to be gunned down in cold blood. He rushed over as Price called for additional medical assistance. Larson was conscious but barely. His face, pale with shock, turned to see Brandon. The officer's eyes flickered with confusion, and maybe, just maybe, a hint of gratitude that someone was there to help. "Ambulance is on the way," Brandon said, kneeling beside him. "Hang in there." Larson swallowed, grimacing in pain. They shot me," he rasped. "Two guys, black SUV, tried to get my dash cam. They were talking about you." Brandon's chest tightened. "Me? What did they say?" Larson's breath came in ragged gasps. "Said to warn the Fed, back off, or more bodies hit the ground." Then his eyes rolled back, and he lost consciousness. The paramedics swooped in, loading him onto a stretcher. Brandon watched, torn between anger and worry. Whoever was orchestrating this narcotics operation just escalated to open violence. He thought grimly. And they'd done it in broad daylight, shooting a cop. The shooting of a local officer lit a fire under the entire department. Chief Henderson ordered a lockdown at the station, demanding every available officer on high alert. Media vans rolled into town, sensationalizing the story of a small community rocked by brazen violence. Brandon convened with Price in the station's war room, a large board covered in photos, suspect names, and pinned strings connecting them. A new face had joined them, a federal liaison from the FBI's regional office, named Special Agent Andrea Cole, dispatched to provide backup. Cole was calm, methodical, and offered fresh eyes on the case. They pored over the new evidence. Dashcam footage from Larson's vehicle, though partially destroyed, had captured blurred images of a dark SUV speeding away. Forensics identified bullet casings that matched a weapon used in another shooting 3 months prior in Detroit, a case also connected to the same narcotics ring they were investigating. "This is definitely the same network," Brandon said. "They're panicking now that we're close, and they're willing to kill to protect their operation." Price nodded. "Larson's stable but in ICU. If and when he regains consciousness, maybe he can identify the shooters. Agent Cole scribbled notes. We need to strike before they can strike again. Jacobs, have you interviewed Diaz yet? He nodded. He's under protective custody. Let's push for a formal statement. We can cut a deal with the U.S. attorney if Diaz can finger the higher-ups. After hours of negotiations, Diaz finally agreed to talk. He laid out the details in a trembling voice. He named a mid-level manager at Henderson & Sons, someone Diaz claimed gave him sealed packages to slip into truck shipments. The manager, Diaz explained, used burner phones to coordinate deliveries with contacts in various states. Diaz provided times, dates, and even partial phone numbers he remembered. It was the break they needed. Armed with this new intel, Price and Brandon obtained a warrant, and a joint FBI police task force stormed the manager's home at dawn. They found him attempting to burn documents. They also discovered burner phones, ledgers with cryptic entries, and a safe filled with cash. It was enough evidence to tie him directly to interstate drug trafficking. That same day, Brandon interrogated the manager for hours. Under the weight of federal charges, the manager folded. He identified a higher link in Detroit, a man named Marcus Red Delaney, a notorious figure with rumored ties to several violent incidents in multiple states. Delaney was the final piece that bridged Claiborne's quiet trucking hub to a sprawling drug empire. With the manager in custody, news broke throughout Claiborne. Chief Henderson held a press conference, standing next to Brandon and Price, commending their efforts in uncovering a dangerous operation that had infiltrated the very fabric of the town's commerce. Cameras flashed, and reporters clamored for details about the officer shooting. Brandon answered questions tactfully, ensuring not to jeopardize the ongoing investigation. Price credited the chief's leadership, and Chief Henderson publicly praised the FBI's professionalism, directly calling out Brandon's integral role in dismantling the smuggling ring. As the conference ended, the chief pulled Brandon aside. "Agent Jacobs, I just wanted to say my department owes you an apology." His gaze flicked to where Larson's hospital photo sat on the desk. Larson had his prejudices, but at the end of the day, I believe he was a good cop, just misguided. "He's awake now, by the way. He's asking to see you." Brandon was momentarily taken aback. "Me?" Henderson nodded. "Yes, maybe he needs to clear the air." Though the idea made Brandon uneasy, he recognized this might be a necessary step toward closure. He thanked the chief and left to visit the hospital. Larson lay in a sterile white bed, tubes and monitors surrounding him. His face was pale, and the usual swagger had vanished, replaced by vulnerability. When Brandon entered, Larson looked at him with a mixture of embarrassment and relief. "I heard the bust went down," Larson croaked. "Caught the bastards who shot me." Brandon nodded, approaching the bed. "We have the manager in custody, and we're building a case against the network. You'll get your justice." Larson was silent for a moment, then his eyes dropped. "Look, Jacobs, I've been a real jerk. You probably hate my guts." Brandon folded his arms. "I don't hate you, Officer Larson, but I won't deny you made things hard. All I ever wanted was to do my job." Larson swallowed, pain etched on his features. "I was wrong about you, and maybe about a lot of things. You saved my life out there, calling that ambulance, staying by me until it arrived. Thank you." Brandon remained composed. "I did what anyone would have done." Larson gave a sad half smile. "Not everyone. Some might have been glad to see me bleed. I wouldn't blame them." An uncomfortable silence stretched. Finally, Larson cleared his throat. I'm not going to pretend I don't see color. I do. I was raised. Well, let's just say my old man had some ideas about who belonged where. I guess I never questioned it much." His voice shook. "But this whole thing being shot, seeing how close I came to dying it, made me realize how stupid I've been. I'm sorry, Jacobs. Brandon stood there, grappling with a flood of emotions: anger, resentment, pity, relief. Finally, he gave a single nod. I appreciate the apology. I truly hope you use this as a chance to change. Larson's eyes watered slightly. I will. If I get back on the force, I want to do better. They exchanged a few more words, and Brandon left, feeling the weight on his shoulders lighten just a bit. Karma had come full circle. Larson had mocked his credentials, scoffed at his presence. Now he was thanking him. The hard lesson had been delivered, and a man's life had nearly been the cost. Over the next week, the small town of Claiborne buzzed with the aftermath of the arrests. More names emerged, more warrants issued. Detective Price and Brandon coordinated with federal units in Detroit, culminating in the takedown of Marcus Red Delaney himself. What started as a few suspicious trucking routes ended with the toppling of an interstate narcotics empire. Chief Henderson hosted a quiet ceremony in the station's briefing room, awarding certificates of commendation to Brandon and Price. Larson, still confined to a wheelchair, attended, offering a respectful nod to Brandon. The entire department applauded when Henderson announced that the FBI's involvement had not only rooted out a major criminal network, but also helped improve protocols for any future infiltration attempts. As for Carlos Diaz, his testimony proved invaluable. Under witness protection, he relocated to another state, leaving behind the fear that had haunted him. The manager from Henderson and Sons was indicted on federal drug charges, along with several co-conspirators. Corporate heads were rocked by scandals, but disavowed all knowledge of criminal activities. On a breezy afternoon, Brandon found himself once again at Mama Pearl's diner. This time, he wasn't alone. Detective Price sat opposite him, enjoying a slice of apple pie. "So," she said, taking a sip of coffee, "all's well that ends well?" Brandon shook his head. "It's never really over. There's always another case, another ring. But for now, Claiborne can breathe a little easier." Price sighed happily. "I think after all this, I'm taking a week off. Maybe I'll visit my sister in Maine." Brandon smiled. "Sounds nice. I might head home for a few days, see my mother in Chicago. Then it's back to Quantico for whatever they assign me next." They ate in a companionable silence for a while. Outside, the sun shone on Claiborne's main street, where pedestrians strolled, free of the dark shadow that had loomed over their town only weeks before. Finally, Price leaned forward, a teasing glint in her eye. "So, you gonna take a piece of our town with you?" He laughed softly, recalling how out of place he'd felt upon his arrival. "Maybe just a lesson or two," he said, "that no matter how small a town may seem, big truths can hide within it. And that prejudice doesn't stand a chance against people who stand for what's right." She raised her coffee mug in a mock toast. "Well said, Agent Jacobs." They clinked mugs, two colleagues who had become friends through the crucible of a high-stakes case. And in that moment, the memory of a cop's mocking laughter felt like a distant echo, drowned out by the applause of justice well served. And so ends the story of the small town station, where one officer's scoff collided with a determined FBI agent's resolve. From the first dismissive laugh to the final takedown of a criminal empire, Claiborne witnessed how pride, prejudice, and hidden agendas can crumble when confronted by unwavering truth. Special Agent Brandon Jacobs came for a routine investigation, but stayed long enough to shake the foundations of a town steeped in old ways. In the end, justice wasn't just a concept, it was a force that demanded reckoning, even for those who wore the badge. If you found this story gripping the drama, the twists, the karmic reckoning, don't let it end here. Like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to the channel for more captivating tales of crime, redemption, and unbreakable determination. Your support keeps these stories coming, reminding us that justice knows no bounds.